right to this now. Government has said it will not be extending the fuel price levy reduction beyond the 31st of May. This after it had reduced the fuel levy by 150 cents. Energy Minister Gwede Mantashe said funds raised from the sale of the strategic reserves were only enough to fund the reduced levy for 2 months. Joining us now for an economic perspective behind the government's position is Econometrix Director and Economist, Dr Azar Jammine. Dr Jammine, good evening and thank you very much for your time. Is there a direct relationship between the fuel levy and economic growth?
Between the fuel levy and economic?
Growth.
Growth.
Yeah.
Well, the fuel levy is the fourth largest source of tax revenue in South Africa. It raises almost 90 billion rand a year, and after personal tax, VAT and company tax, it is the fourth largest source and accounts for about 5% of all tax revenue collected. Now, to give a concession of R1.50 per litre on a fuel levy that's just under R4 a litre means that the government basically is prepared to sacrifice around 35% of that fuel levy, which amounts to about 36 billion rand a year, if it were to be kept for a whole year. In the first 2 months of this concession, the government sacrificed 6 billion rand, but it doesn't come off the actual budget, and this is where the trick lies. It was basically financed from the sale of strategic oil reserves. Yeah. And this is why one suspects the government is reluctant to use this, to extend this special concession beyond those 2 months, because it's run out of the ability to fund it all from the strategic fuel fund, and would now, if it were to extend the fuel levy, it would need to cut into its own budget, and that means raising the need to raise taxes from other sources to accommodate this. Yeah. So you'd be taking money away from Peter to pay Paul.
So I mean, it does seem, and maybe for a while people were never really paying attention to it, but now with the latest hikes, with all the other demands that are on the people, electricity and so on, the burden is becoming heavy on consumers around this question of a fuel levy. If government's expenditure was not impacted per se in the past 2 months, where was the impact really, and when will it be felt?
Well, the big impact would be felt next Wednesday, because if they don't extend this concession, given that oil prices are still extremely high and the rand has been relatively weak against the dollar over the last month, you would the under recovery on petrol is around over 2 rand a litre, and then on top of that you would have R1.50 coming back into the petrol price. The petrol price would rise above 25 rand a litre on next Wednesday, and that in itself would push the inflation rate up to 7% for June, way above the 6% upper end of the inflation target. And arguably this was one of the factors that influenced the Reserve Bank last week to increase interest rates by a full 0.5% instead of 0.25%, because they want to send a message that do not use this big increase in fuel prices as a vehicle through which to pass on cost increases to consumers through other goods and services.
Yeah. Is South Africa the only country that has tampered with the fuel levy, just to give some relief to the consumers?
As far as I know, it is the only country. Obviously, this is not a unique situation unique to South Africa. Many countries in the world are now facing sharply higher fuel prices as a result of the sharp increase in the price of oil, especially following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And it's one of the key reasons why inflation rates, even in the likes of the United States, have gone to 8.5%, and the United Kingdom 9%. In fact, we're quite lucky here with our inflation rate still down at around 6%.
Yeah. In this system then of ours, this growth-oriented tax system, is the R1.50 that is now going to be pumped in back, if indeed government goes ahead with this decision, used efficiently? Where does it benefit us?
That's of course the very key, but it goes to the heart of all tax revenue. How efficiently is it being used? And one of the reasons why the South African economy has seen declining growth over the past decade is because a lot of the taxes that have been raised from those able to pay the taxes have been abused by politicians and others connected to them through state capture. So you're absolutely correct. Is it efficiently used? And that is a very big political question in South Africa right now.
Yeah. Do we have other options then of where to raise funds except for the sale of our strategic oil reserves? Is there something else that we can sell that we're keeping in stock that can help us reduce the fuel levy?
You know, there are a couple of little additional levies that are raised from the fuel price, pipeline levies, retail margins, wholesale margins. The government can play around with them. But the most that it will save on tampering with some of these is to save around 20 or 30 cents per litre, not R1.50. The only way of saving R1.50 on the fuel price was to actually give it the entire concession and cut the fuel levy itself by that amount.
Yeah. With the Reserve Bank having gone ahead to say, okay, let's raise the interest rate to almost be ahead of the curve as far as inflation is concerned, would it be a correct decision for government to bring back that fuel levy, or would we benefit more if they extended the reduction?
You know, given the real stress that the consumers are under, there would be a temptation to say, let's extend this. But then it's basically taking the same kind of approach as was taken to extend the special social grant to those who are unemployed and who could not access other social grants when COVID-19 hit the consumers and businesses. And there is a limit to the extent to which one can keep doing it. You have to, if you do it, you've got to keep hoping that oil prices may eventually fall back or the rand strengthen to enable you to go back to normality. And that's a big risk. In the interim, you know, you will have ratings agencies and others casting a beady eye over this and saying, the government is clearly not prepared to cut its purse strings sufficiently, even in the face of these unexpected shocks. And by the way, this is not the only shock and extra kind of expenditure that could be incurred. The other one is now expenditure that has to be spent on addressing the floods in KwaZulu-Natal. And the big elephant in the room is that public servants are demanding a 10% pay hike when the government has only budgeted for a 2.8% pay hike this year. And in fact, if the government were to relent to public servants, the equivalent would be to extend this special dispensation on the fuel levy of R1.50 for an entire year. That's the kind of order of magnitude we're talking about. But it establishes a negative principle, and that is that government is unable to really stick to its budget. Apologists will say, but this is a special situation. One couldn't foresee oil prices rising so sharply. Therefore, you know, there is an argument to be said for using state funds and part of the budget to extend this special dispensation. But at the end of the day, there is the risk that it will all catch up to the government if it does relent on this as well.
Dr. Jammine, before we let you go, there's another suggestion coming from outer. They are saying rather phase it in. Don't bring the entire R1.50. Maybe bring it over 3 months, 50 cents a month. Would that work? Is that a good idea?
I think that's a very sensible and practical approach. You've got to bear in mind R1.50 per litre per month costs the government 3 billion rand. So if you were to phase it in, you would basically cut that by a third to R1 billion. I think that's in the order of acceptability. I think the markets would also see that as a practical suggestion rather than one massive shock onto consumers. It would still really only mean that the price of petrol would go up to 24 instead of 25 rand a litre next week. 23 rand a litre instead of 25 rand a litre. The following month it would have to go to more than that. And but it is a practical approach to just soften the blow slightly.
Dr. Jammine, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on. He's the Econometrix Director, economist Dr. Azar Jammine.